In this narrow enclosure sleep heroes. There are no cowards here. These were men worthy, not only of the country, but of the age in which they lived. And with unselfish patience, unfaltering fortitude, and magnificent courage, they laid their all upon what they believed to be the altar of right. Originally, Camp Chase was a Union military training center. Camp Chase in 1861 was a different place than it was in 1865. In the very beginning, because the North wasn't prepared for all these prisoners to come here, they didn't know what to do with all of them. And so it was hastily built, and because of that, some of the prisoners suffered here. In fact, the first prisoners who came here were a lot of dissidents. They weren't soldiers, they were citizens who spoke ill of the government. And so they were the first ones to really arrive. And they came mostly from Western Virginia, because West Virginia hadn't become a state yet, and Northern Kentucky. Towards the end of the war, in 1864, the conditions as far as illnesses at the prison for the arriving Confederates were that smallpox was prevalent in the camp. A lot of it was brought in here from the soldiers, the last big group of soldiers who came here in 1864 from Hood's campaign in Tennessee. There were 5,000 Confederates captured at the Battle of Nashville, and many of whom, the worst cases, came here in 1864. They literally walked through the front gates, and some of them fell over dead. Many of them were missing arms and legs, and some of them brought the smallpox disease with them. One particular soldier, Confederate soldier, said there wasn't any difference after a while of seeing a dead soldier carried out of here on a stretcher than seeing a dead dog. They got so used to it, and it was so prevalent. By 1866, all that was once Camp Chase Union military camp was torn down, and the bits and pieces of scrap wood that was left over was used to enclose this cemetery as a fence, and other pieces of wood were used as headboards, head markers. This fence that was built around here fell down. The headboards, they broke off, and so it left it in a pretty bad state of affairs for a long while. Along came Union Colonel William Henry Knoss in 1895. He came from the east, and he heard about these Confederate soldiers and the condition of the cemetery here. The Confederates had wounded him seriously at the Battle of Fredericksburg in December of 1862. He was shot in the face and left for dead on the field of battle. He did recover from his wounds, but he didn't go back to the war. In 1868, he traveled south to Virginia and North Carolina, where he met up with a Confederate guide. He traveled through some of the cemeteries down there, and the Confederate guide and he had quickly discovered that both were wounded at the Battle of Fredericksburg. The Confederate had lost his leg, and of course Colonel Knoss had nearly lost his life. A bond of friendship was formed at that point, and each promised that if they ever came upon the other's comrade's final resting place, that they would do all they could to give them a sacred, dignified, and honorable final resting place. Almost 30 years later, Colonel Knoss came to this place, and he saw what the condition was, and he kept true to the pledge that he had made to the Confederate guide. He decided that he would organize an annual ceremony, which still goes on today, 117 years later. And these ceremonies were at first not looked upon very well by his Union brethren. 6 Confederates in this area were businessmen, and they helped him to organize the first ceremony in 1895. But they didn't show up because they were worried that it might affect their business. This is 30 years after the war. The feelings were still this strong against honoring the Confederate dead here at Camp Chase. So by 1898, there were between 4,000 and 5,000 people who came to that ceremony. A few years later, in 1902, the ceremony was the unveiling of the arch, which you see right behind me here. And it was raised through private funds, but Knauss was behind all of this. The sentiments were still strong against what he was doing here. They had to place guards at this arch for 10 days to make sure that someone didn't come by and blow it up. At that time, he turned over these ceremonies to the United Daughters of the Confederacy. And for the next 93 years, the Dixie chapter here in Columbus, Ohio, and Bexley organized these ceremonies until 1995, when they turned this over to the Hilltop Historical Society, for which I'm a board member. And we proudly carry on the tradition of the golden-hearted Colonel William Henry Knauss. Every one of these markers represents somebody's son, father, brother, cousin. These men, many of whom could have just resigned themselves and said, I'll take up no arms against this government, that I'll sign an agreement that I won't fight the government and I could go home. They stood for a principle that they believed in. Whether you believe in it, or I believe in it, or anybody else believes in it, they were men of honor and courage.